You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and as I'm recording this on Christmas Day, happy holidays from Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Yep, I'm still working on the holiest day of the year, just so that I can bring another story about hikers to you. You can tell that I enjoy this, can't you? This is another show with another emotional story, and this week's guest, Willow Bolton, or Angel, is somebody you've already met before, but from somebody else's story. I won't spoil it for you, but this young lady went through a lot this year to hike the Appalachian Trail. I'm hoping that her trials and tribulations may make one or two of you realise that the trail is definitely for everybody. Willow will be along soon. I'm putting off the hostel section this week to catch up with a friend of the show who helped me out so much this year as I was hiking the AT. Ryan Hopkins put all the shows out when I was on the trail, and we caught up as he had some really exciting news to share. Ryan's a remarkable young man, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy hearing from him. Ryan will be on right after Willow. Lastly, our wandering nomad Paul Stutzman reaches the middle of summer and naked hiking day, and yep, he went there. So let's move on and introduce you to Willow Bolton, or Angel. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to a young woman who we met somewhat peripherally in a previous episode, actually. This is Willow Bolton, or Angel. Hey, Angel, how are you?
Awesome. How are you?
You sound pretty awesome. I'm very good, thank you. So I mentioned that we've already kind of met you in a previous episode. Remind people where we've met you, because I know it was at a shelter when you turned up cussing up a storm. Tell us about that.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So I know Waffle and Hawkeye, or Gavin and Rob, have been on here. Yes, oh, my gosh. So I'll start from the very beginning, I guess. I started the trail somewhat January 22nd, okay? I was off and on, and I was back on in April 2nd, and I was hiking with someone else I had met on the trail, Bullfrog, who's now my fiance.
Uh-huh.
And we were hiking. Poor thing. This guy he's a godsend. Bless his heart. So we're hiking. We had caught back up at some trail magic, and we have 5 miles left for the day. And we're hiking, and those last 5 miles were all uphill. I'm from Florida. I don't do hills.
There are no hills.
I am hiking. Yeah, exactly. So I'm hiking, and I'm I just lost it. You know, just flowing, just cuss words flowing, right? And so we're hiking, and we get to the shelter, and I'm spewing. And I come around the side of the shelter just spewing. And behind me, I hear this little voice that says, "Do you need a hug?" And I turn around, and it's Hawkeye. And he was 13 at the time. I see this little 13-year-old, and I'm like, oh, shiitake mushrooms, you know, like, and that's kind of just how I met Waffle and Hawkeye.
They, as you probably heard, they talked very fondly of you. And that introduction I always thought was funny. And that actually led, after that episode, your mother then wrote to me, let me know that the cussing fireball was not raised with that mouth. And she actually put not in capital letters. Did you find when you were on the trail that it took more out of you than you'd anticipated? Because I know that many people have spoken in the past about the emotions of being on the trail. It really gets to you, doesn't it? Did you have that experience as well?
Yes, and that's no, I was not raised with that kind of mouth. The trail brought it out of me, honestly. Yeah, I'm working on tuning it down now.
But was it the difficulty of the trail, or was it the way in which it just tests you so much, it just brings so much out of you?
Yes, it was how it tested me because, like I said, I had started January 22nd, and I started with my aunt, and we did a week together, and then my mom did 2 weeks with me, and then this time out, I was by myself.
Right.
And I've just learned, like, I love taking walks by myself. I love popping in my headphones, and I call it taking a walk with God. Just popping in my headphones and just taking a walk by myself. The trail is different, and just being out there by myself, I can't hike by myself.
Oh, really?
I can take those walks.
Did you not enjoy that part of it then? Did you not enjoy hiking by yourself?
No.
Oh.
No, and I don't know what it is. I think I don't like to be lost.
Right.
I don't like to be in unfamiliar territory by myself. So back home in Florida, I take all these walks by myself, but, I lived in the same area my entire life. Being out in the woods.
You know where you are. You know where you are, don't you? Yeah.
Yes. And those white blazes were so comforting. So I knew where I was going in the right direction, but it was just, I just don't like to be alone. And so it just took everything out of me.
I want to ask you about that. Isn't that an amazing feeling? And I had that same feeling myself. When you didn't see a white blaze for more than about 200 yards, you thought to yourself, oh my God, am I lost? But the moment you see one, there's a real feeling of relief that comes over you, isn't there?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So let's go back now to why you're actually on the trail in the first place. In fact, let's go back to when you were born, because you shared with me when we spoke before, you were born with a condition that's impacted you throughout your life. Tell us about that and, the circumstances.
Yes. So that's kind of a big reason I wanted to start on my birthday, January 22nd.
All right.
I was born 2 months premature. And they think because of my premature birth, I had a brain bleed, which caused me to have hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is water in the brain. So basically, we have 4 ventricles that absorb the cerebral spinal fluid, or the water that builds up in the head. And with that brain bleed, with the hydrocephalus, I only have 1 ventricle that works. So they put in a tube or a shunt that drains that excess cerebral spinal fluid to my stomach where it can be absorbed. Now, a lot of people with hydrocephalus will also have greater, we'll call them disabilities. A lot of the other kids or adults will have spina bifida, have scoliosis, have just other issues. I was born with, I was blessed, I should say, with only minor learning disabilities. Right. So I struggled in school a lot. I was almost held back in first and second grade. Mama pulled me out of public school, put me in private and homeschool, and I thrived there. Graduated with 4.0, and then I started college. And I think everybody knows this, but like college is just a different animal. It's kind of like going from taking a hike down the Florida Trail or some of those local trails in Florida to the Appalachian Trail. It's a totally different animal.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And I didn't do well. And so the other reason I hiked the trail is I had an eating disorder for 8 years. Started when I was 13 and 12 or 13. And when I was 20, I blacked out during a run.
Wow.
And I don't care what I don't care what anybody says or what the fairy tales say. Waking up with an EMT in your face, that's not romantic. So from that point on, when I was 20, I kind of surrendered to that eating disorder. And for the past 4 years, three and a half years, I have spent my time trying to recover and heal and love myself through that. And so that was kind of another big reason I wanted to hike the trail is when I was 20, my life kind of just came crashing down.
So was the eating disorder in any way related to the hydrocephalus?
Inadvertently, I had been, because of that minor learning disability disorder, I struggled in school again.
Sure.
And got picked on a lot.
Right.
A lot. We called it being picked on, teased. Now they call it bullying.
Of course.
I just was picked on a lot. So it tore at me, so it told me that I wasn't worthy. I wasn't smart. Wow. I wasn't beautiful. I wasn't any of these things. And so it just manifested into that eating disorder.
Wow. So you had that for about 7 odd years. And I suppose the obvious question to ask you now is, why on earth did you think that somebody who was struggling, as you clearly were struggling in a way, would feel that taking on a 2,200-mile long-distance hike was really a good thing for you? Or did you, I mean, what was the motivation behind it?
Well, do you know of the book Wild?
Yes, I do.
Or the movie? It's now a movie.
Yeah.
I had read that book. It was a friend had suggested I read it, and I did. And I read all of the struggles that she had, and that was the reason she hiked the PCT, Cheryl Strayed.
Yeah.
And I felt it. I feel her, you know?
Wow.
My life kind of in a way came crashing down like hers did. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just leave my life behind, and I'm gonna get my crap together and go for a long walk with Daddy. A really, really long walk with God.
Right.
So, yeah.
Were you a hiker at the time when you started having these thoughts?
Not exactly. I was known in my neighborhood as the girl that would bike around the neighborhood. The loop that I lived in is like a third of a mile. And so I would bike a lot, and I got into just walking a lot. Like I would walk 11 miles, you know, and that was kind of a little bit of that therapy. So I would do walks, urban hikes is what I would call them. But never really truly hiking per se. Nothing like the trail.
I mean, you've already said what a difference this is. So when you stood on the top of, so you started 21st of January, say with your aunt, I think it was, with your aunt?
Yes.
Yeah, with your aunt. And so was the intention then to go all the way with your aunt, or was the idea that you were going to just start there and see how things went? And, or, you know, why did you get off after a week?
So the half of that hiking the trail was to start over, right? Get my crap together. The other part was that hydrocephalus. My mom had the great idea, because she just had we'll call him a coworker, walk coast to coast for MS. He has MS.
Right.
And she's like, hey, since you are physically able to do all these things that a lot of people with hydrocephalus can't, why don't you do this to raise funds and awareness for hydrocephalus? And so originally what I was going to do was hike little parts with different people. And my aunt decided to take the first leg. And so we did a week. Plus, it was 23 degrees when we started. And Little Miss Florida doesn't do cold more than she doesn't do hills.
That was one of the things I was thinking about. You know, when we talked before, I knew you lived in Florida. So 22nd of January in Georgia is not warm, I know. And I went I went a month later. So tell me, why did you go? I mean, were you working at the time? Were you out of school? I mean, what was your situation that allowed you to get away anyway?
Well, like I said, I had dropped out of college when I was 20.
Sure.
I had done a certification program, but that kind of failed too.
Right.
I had been unemployed since January 18th. I was working. I had quit my job January 18th and started the trail. We headed up to Georgia on the 21st and set foot on the trail on the 22nd.
So how did you feel standing there, ready to go? And you were thinking yourself, were you thinking you can do this, or were you just there for the weeks you thought I can get through this, or were you thinking longer term at this stage?
Well, my aunt and I kind of butted heads, so I was just emotional from that. I love my aunt. We've kind of worked through it, but we don't travel well together. We were both out of our element there, and so I think that's why we butted heads. Right. But it was, I can get through a week at a time, and I was just getting ready for the next little leg, right? Right. So I think that's another big reason that when I started back out on trail on April 2nd, that I was just so distraught, we'll put it.
You said, you know what, you sound like, well, you weren't really in the right frame of mind to be on the trail, because you know now you've experienced it, a lot of it, you know, and I wonder how you. Hopefully you're laughing there, not crying, by the way, because I am. Yeah, I know you are, yeah, and because I know you went back out again. You did Fontana Dam South, didn't you? For your second leg. That was in March with your mum, yeah. So and then you missed out the Smokies, and then you started from Davenport Gap. So that frame of mind you're in when you started from Davenport Gap, What did you, because you'd already had 3 weeks on the trail, what did you learn that enabled you to make that effort going forward?
That you meet people along the way.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, I think, my hope was that I just meet people and I just get to know people and just fall into a bubble, into a tramily. And I did.
Right.
I give all the credit to my tramily, to Hawkeye, the sweet thing he is, do you need a hug? We honestly, him and I bounced off of each other. He would have bad days and I would cheer him up. Like I was his designated, anytime he was having a bad day, Waffle and Bullfrog would just like, hey, yo, you need to go help him. Like I became trail mom.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
Yes. Yes.
What the trail can do to people who are a entirely different generation. Let's face it, in real life, you'd never be looking out for a 13 or 14-year-old kid, would you? But, there's something about the equality of the trail that really brings us all together when we're out there, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's not to say he didn't drive me absolutely bonkers. He did. Oh, my gosh. We still butted heads, too. But it was that he's like my little brother. Instantly, he's my little brother. Or
yeah.
I wouldn't say son, but, because he calls me trail mom. But he was my little brother, and he reminded me a lot of my little brother. The struggles he was going through, my brother had gone through the same year that I went through my struggles.
So I'd love to know then, so you're out there, you've met up with the trail family, which I know you were very happy to do. Did this calm you? Because it sounds to me when you started, you've gone through a heck of a lot in your, obviously since birth, but also since this eating disorder. Did you feel the trail calmed you a lot? Yes,
it did exactly what it needed to do. What I went out there for.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, and we don't know it's going to affect us in these ways, does it? And when we spoke previously, you told me that part of the problem with your condition was that you were easily dehydrated, and of course, dehydration on the AT is kind of baked in, isn't it? You're going to some cases cope. How were you able to cope with dehydration? And when you couldn't, were there some really serious problems associated with it?
Yes. So and then that's kind of why I chose the AT, because I knew the PCT had water problems, and I knew that the CDT, they had problems with water, and I'm like, I am not going there. It may be warmer, but I am not going there. So that's why I chose the AT, because I knew there was a lot of water.
Right.
I knew I'd be able to have that. When we got into, I know Virginia, water was scarce. It would be 7 miles between water sources or 11 miles between water sources.
Sure.
We found that there were water caches. I think that started Northern Virginia, though. Water caches where trail angels would leave, gallons of water, which, oh my gosh.
That's worth pointing out to people, isn't it? While you can't rely upon these things, there's sometimes you just come to a road and some kind person, because they know there's not water around, have come to the trail and put out water bottles. Isn't it amazing to find that? Especially for you, I'm sure.
Yes. But 3 ridges, and you know that. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
It is 3,000 feet of elevation in 3 miles, 7 miles?
Yes.
I think it was about 3. It was an okay day if you're not hiking, temperature wise, but if you're hiking, it was hot, dripping sweat. And that was the 7 miles between water. So we cameled up, and I think I started to just ration out my water just because I knew, oh my gosh, we don't have water for a while kind of thing. But I was still trying to drink as much as I could.
Yeah.
I got dehydrated. When I get dehydrated, I will get these headaches, and they turn into migraines. And then those migraines cause me to throw up a lot. So, oh gosh, what were we? 2 miles, a mile and a half from a shelter.
Right.
And I started getting this headache. I started getting lightheaded. And I'm like, okay, it's okay. I'm okay. It's fine. Just keep going. Get to where you're going to stop. You'll get water. You'll be fine. And I learned too that goodies, if I take a goodies powder, that headache powder, within 15 minutes, it'll stop the migraine, from coming. So it's like, it's okay. I'll get to this, shelter. I'll take that goodies. I'll be fine. And we get there, and Waffle and Hawkeye were much stronger hikers than me and Bullfrog. So they had already been there for, I don't even know how long, maybe half an hour.
Sure.
And it was Three Ridges also took a toll on Bullfrog. So that's kind of why we had very similar hiking paces.
Right.
So we hiked together a lot. But
Right.
we got there, and Hawkeye, sweet thing. He's like, hey, I think it was a brewery that was just past that, about a mile.
Was that Devil's Backbone Brewery?
Yes, there we go. Mile 0.7, and they're like, hey, then we could get to sleep in an actual bed that night. And I was like, I'm sorry, y'all, I cannot go anymore. I need to stop. So Bullfrog and I ended up staying at the shelter, and Waffle and Hawkeye went on.
Uh-huh.
And I'm so glad that they did, because Hawkeye was kind of very sensitive to certain things. I really didn't want him to see me get sick.
Right.
And I ended up getting sick. We got to that shelter. I sat down. I ate. Sometimes eating helped too. So I ate a couple bacon bits, and I had that goodies. It was too late. I felt it coming, and for the rest of the night, I was throwing up.
Oh, gosh.
It took till probably about 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. Now, because I know Waffle will listen to this. Waffle was the type to want to sleep in and get up at 8. 8 was perfect, right?
Yeah, you said that, yeah.
6 a.m., I was wide awake.
Right.
So to sleep till 9 was major. We slept till 9 and made it the next mile 0.7 to Devil's Backbone, and we did take 00. We were also meeting Bullfrog's sister there, took that 00, and I think that helped.
Right. Well, you know, I'm surprised you didn't get off the trail, because something like that would kind of frighten some people. Do you take doubles and triple zeros quite often?
Yes. We would take maybe a 0 once a week. We would get at each town. So we would supply ourselves for a week and get ourselves to a town every week, and we'd take that 0.
Right.
Waffle has a YouTube channel, and so he was uploading things. And so I think big part of that was so that he could have some Wi-Fi and upload some things.
All right. So you all took 0. You stayed together as a tramley, even with the zeros as well.
Yeah.
So that's sometimes how some of these tramleys split up, isn't it? Because they decide they want to do different things. But the 4 of you stayed together pretty much the whole way, didn't you, till you got off?
Yeah. Well, till Waffle and Hawkeye ended up getting off second day in New Jersey.
All right. Okay.
I don't know exactly where we were, but yeah.
So what sort of mileage were you eventually able to get up to? Because you said you were hiking relatively slowly, you and the team. So what sort of mileage was your best day?
Well, I only did one 20-miler, I think, as a tramley, 18 miles.
Yeah. Don't you think that anything above about 14 or 15 miles feels like a long day anyway?
Yes. Yeah. I think our average was about 15.
That's nice.
But yeah, 18 was one of those longer.
And did you have any animal encounters on the trail? Because I found this year, when I went this year, I hardly saw any animals at all. It was surprising to me.
Oh no. No. So first bear encounter at least for me, hurricane shelter. And I don't know if you heard these stories, but so we're sleeping, right? Mm-hmm. There at Hurricane Shelter, and it's 5 o'clock the next morning. And one of the other guys that had hiked with us, he was a 65-year-old man. He got up at 5 a.m. every day. He got up and he was going to the privy.
All right. By the way, it's all I'll do in the morning, just so you know.
Yes. He was coming back, and he saw we had hung our food, right? He had the perfect PCT hang, which is what you would have thought. Perfect PCT hang. He was coming back, and he saw the bear eating his food, and now we talked about my mouth. He was cussing at this bear. Get away from it.
Yeah, I got the drift. Yeah.
Yes. Oh yes. And so of course that woke all of us up.
Don't give your mother another reason to write to me.
Yeah, there you go. But so that woke all of us up. Hawkeye can sleep through anything. I was still a little groggy, but everybody in the shelter got up and helped him throw rocks at this bear.
Wow.
The other thing is our food. So Bullfrog and I ended up just hanging our food together in the same bag because he had a huge food bag.
Right.
So we hung it together. So our food was on the same limb, just a little farther back.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, so that was kind of like that first bear encounter. We saw quite a few in Blue Ridge Parkway.
Wow.
Yeah, that was that first one. And we'll never forget that. Oh my gosh. Being woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning, to,
I would imagine.
get out of here.
I just saw one. I just saw one, and that was just looking at us. It didn't do it. In fact, it might have been stuffed as far as I know, because I didn't move at all. It was a nightmare. So anyway, you eventually got to Kent in Connecticut, and you decided you were going to finish at that point. What were the circumstances that made you decide you were going to finish?
There were a lot of things, like I mentioned. Waffle and Hawkeye had gotten off halfway through New Jersey, and they needed to. They were having some issues and whatnot, so they needed to. So, but I really wanted to finish the trail. I didn't finish college. I wanted to finish the trail.
Right.
So I kind of pushed us. Like I said, as a family, we all pulled each other, right?
Sure.
So I pushed me and Bullfrog along, and I was physically done. We went from doing, 15, 18 miles a day to 8. I could barely get through 8.
Wow.
I had many breakdowns just because I was just so tired.
Sure.
And it was mid-August, and we were originally, we knew at this point with our pace, we weren't going to be able to finish in time.
Sure.
So we were just going to make it through Connecticut, actually, and hit the 1,500 mile mark, right?
Uh-huh.
And we're laying in the tent one night, and he kept good contact with my mom throughout the trail, because I knew with T-Mobile I wouldn't have service anymore, so I just kept my phone off. Well, he had AT&T and kind of kept contact with her, right? And he had talked to her. He was talking to her about it. And my brother's birthday was the end of August. And so we're laying there in the tent, and he turns to me and he says, "So what do you think about being home for your brother's birthday?"
Nice.
And I just thought about surprising my brother for his birthday, and it just brought tears to my eyes. And I knew that was the right thing to do. So we had a couple days. His birthday, the 28th of August. We had tickets for Amtrak.
Uh-huh.
I guess the 27th, so we'd get there the morning of the 28th.
Sure.
And this was probably August 20th, right?
Right.
So we had a couple days. So we kind of were like, okay, well, if we do this pace, we can make the 1,500, and we'll call it. I wanted to finish it like a state line, basically,
Sure. Yeah.
and not just in the middle of a state. So we're hiking, and I had a previous knee injury when I was 16, and I had to have knee surgery. And it's kind of just, my knees have never been the same since, of course. And with these up and down hills, it just, they were giving me problems. They would swell up. And we were hiking, and my shoes, I had Solomon's, and they were just slipping on rocks. Like I was slipping and sliding and hitting the ground at least 5 times a day. And we were hiking, and my knee caught. And before that knee injury, my knees would do that, and I knew why. And so I knew, like, it started catching. I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. I have bad knees. I don't want to make them worse.
That must be a terrible feeling when you're so determined you want to finish, and there's something beyond your control, your knees, something beyond your control makes you finish. Were you terribly disappointed, or did you always plan you were going to go back to the trail?
Well, at that point, Bullfrog and I knew we already had to come back the next year and finish.
Right. Okay.
So at that point, it was just like, okay, so this is where we're ending. And we made it to Kent, Connecticut, just inside of Connecticut. And there you go. That was a state line. Yeah. So I was like, all right, that's fine. I'm good, which allowed us, we toured New York, because we were so close to New York still.
Sure, yeah. Toured
New York for those couple days before getting on Amtrak, which was a good treat. That was a great way to end it. And I got home August 28th and surprised my brother at his work.
Cool.
And he was so surprised. Surprised.
I bet.
So.
I bet. Yeah. Well, look, I'm glad your mother reached out. I want to ask you, Because to be honest with you, when I heard your story in the first place, I thought to myself, how can she even do this? Well, why is she enjoying this? And when you told me it was the people you met and how kind everybody was on the trail. But is there anything you'd like to say to people who may think that their, I guess, impairment makes the trail an impossibility for them? Because so many people give so many reasons for not doing something. You seem to have found a reason to do something despite what you're coping with.
The body is an amazing thing, and it can do more than you think it can. As one coach told me, running is 90% mental and 10% physical.
Sure.
So it's all in your head. I say this too all the time to myself is stress, pain, and fear are all figments of your imagination. If you can conquer your mind, you can conquer the world.
Well, I think you've been you're a real inspiration to have done this. I mean, I'm kind of wincing every now and then the things you said, and something that didn't come up in our previous conversation was you'd actually had this eating disorder as well. So to recover from that and taken what you've been, you say you will say blessed with, but some people will say afflicted with from birth. Is really turning things on the head. And I think you've been a real inspiration for people who listen to the show and they believe they can't do this. So it really is a case of just putting one foot in front of the other, isn't it? For about 5 million times, eventually you're going to get there, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I know it wasn't easy in certain parts, but I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about it.
Thank you. And thank you for reaching out.
Okay.
I should say thanks, Mom, for ratting me out.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, love to talk to you, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime. In fact, when you do go next year with Bullfrog, let me know, and we'll keep people up to date with how you're getting on. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay. Bye then.
Okay. Bye.
We've had a lot of supercharged young women on the show over these past 3 years, and they've all faced challenges of some sort in their lives, but Willow had a whole deck of challenges that she's meeting one by one. I really admired her approach. So thanks, Mum, for reaching out to me and putting me on to Willow's story. Now it's Ryan Hopkins, my fellow producer on the show earlier this year. Ryan has some news to share that I think is going to excite one or two of you. Here's Ryan. I'd like to introduce you to Ryan Hopkins. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm good. And just to remind listeners, Ryan was the guy who really helped me. In fact, not helped me, he did the show from when I did the Appalachian Trail podcast earlier this year when I was hiking. Ryan was the one who picked everything up and put it out on the airways. So thanks for doing that, Ryan. And I wanted you on the show, but you're actually in London right now, aren't you? Tell us about why you're in London.
Yeah, so I finished grad school at Florida State in May. And I remember it was actually when I was working on because remember I did the Camino podcast first when you were there.
Oh, of course you did. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was like I was so nervous because it was like the very first episode. And it was when hurricane was hitting Florida. And I was like in a storm shelter trying to get the show out. So anyway, so I've been in Florida the last few years dealing with hurricanes and all that fun stuff, and graduated in May. And I came to work for Florida State at their International Program Study Center that's in London. So I work here with students that are studying abroad during their time at university. So yeah, I'm loving it. I'm definitely learning a lot of British terms, which helps with our conversation sometimes, obviously. And
I'm sure.
This job was also a little bit intentional because not only for my career, but also I knew that it had an end date. So my contract goes until the end of February. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here.
Well, that works out to be somewhat providential, ending the 1st of February, because it means you're coming back to the US. So tell us about the journey that you're going to be making next year.
Yeah, so this has been on my mind for many years, and the timing's finally lined up with work and life and school and everything. And so, I'm going to be through hiking the Appalachian Trail starting in March, hopefully 2020, going northbound from Springer.
So how long has that been in your mind then? I mean, have you always wanted to do this? I know we met on the trail last year, and I know you're very enthusiastic about the trail, but this is quite a step to be doing. So is this something you've been wanting to do for quite a while?
Oh, gosh. How much time do we have? I grew up in Virginia, and I've spent a lot of time around the trail and a lot of time around the outdoors in Appalachia. I did my undergrad at Virginia Tech, where I minored in Appalachian studies, and I just loved the culture and community and the history of the region. And so it's always been close to my heart, but I never really considered a through hike. It always seemed so out of reach.
Sure.
And then, this ties in again, very serendipitous of when I was actually driving down to Florida for the first time to start grad school in 2017, long drive from Virginia, close to like 10 hours. And so I was just like, you know what? I don't know a lot about the Appalachian Trail. Let me just put it in the Apple Podcast and just see what comes up. And I just threw it in there, and I was bored because I had such a far drive. And that's how I found your show. And I found actually the Bruce Matson's, RTK podcast first. And I started listening, and that's really what kind of started this whole thing. And then I started realizing that it's more possible than I thought. And it kind of fell in line with a lot of my passions
by more possible, you mean because two fat guys could do it? You think you could do it? A young slim guy could do it.
I had to figure you were going to say that, but no, I mean, it's more possible with like money and work and life, and it isn't as hard to slide in as I had originally thought. I thought it just wasn't for me, and then I started kind of putting it together and things, and seeing other people that have been successful. And and I started listening to the show and followed along with Bruce's hike, and followed along with all of your guests and things. And then obviously we got connected working on this show. And so sure. I have just been obsessed with it ever since. I mean, reading, as you know, there's no shortage of memoirs and books written about the trail. And so I read all that I can and follow along. And I've had some friends that I know who have hiked, and keeping up with them and keeping up with your hike, it's been really great. So I haven't been able to shake it.
You actually came out to meet us, and we met at Klingman's Dome, didn't we? You came out with a buddy of yours, and we hiked.
Yeah.
And you stayed overnight at the shelter. And I seem to remember you were saying it was a bit colder than you were expecting it to be.
Oh my gosh.
So did that experience of being on the trail and being out there in the cold, because it is damn cold, did that impact your thought process as well?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it's funny. Most of my section hikes and like shakedown hikes I had done in the past couple summers had been in the summer in Virginia in like August, and it's just brutally hot. And I'm just completely hot. And so that was the first one that I did that was cold, and it was like very cold because it was March and we were in the Smokies. And I remember waking up and seeing a frozen water bottle, and I was like, wow. And I was still excited to be there. And I think that kind of confirmed that I was doing the right thing. I mean, obviously it was so cold. I think you guys got snow the day after we left.
That's right.
But I was still so thrilled to be there, and just completely happy in that misery. And that was almost like it definitely confirmed that it was.
That's super. That's lovely. Now, this journey, when you started, by the way, March?
So I'm hoping for that first week of March. Like a lot of people are starting then, and I know that they try to spread out the impact on the trail. So first week of March, hopefully.
Okay, start first week of March. But this is not the journey that you intended to make in 2020, because Ryan and I have been talking about this for some time. What was your plan, which is an awesome plan, by the way?
Well, I always scheme up things. I guess that's how I ended up in London somehow. But I'm always looking for ways to make the experience unique. And so I had originally thought, I see a lot of folks in the hiking community go after things like the Camino, like you did, or the TGO challenge was in Scotland, hiking across Scotland. You see a variety of different things. So I was like, what if I paired this Appalachian Trail through hike with another through hike? I was like, I'm sure someone's done it, but I haven't heard of or seen anything about it recently. And I was like, what if I do this TGO challenge in the middle of my Appalachian Trail through hike?
Oh, right. I said straight away, that was a crazy thing to do. You carry on.
Yeah, I definitely was in over my head. So I applied to do it. I was like, why not? I mean, it could be really exciting. It could be an interesting take on the through hiking experience to leave the Appalachian Trail for a few weeks and hike across Scotland and come back. Unfortunately, so I applied to do it. I got selected, but I didn't get the lottery for it. They only have a certain number of slots that they give out. And so I didn't get selected to do it, probably for the better. I think you told me I was in over my head, and you're probably right. But that unfortunately didn't happen this year, but I am planning to go in 2021, so the following year, for that hike across Scotland. So I'm really excited for that.
And they automatically let you on that because you've already been approved. Is that right?
That's what they told me. I don't know if that's the case every time. I just communicated with them through email. Their whole system is really organized. But from what I gathered, if you don't win the lottery for 1 year, they defer your admittance to the next year. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's people listening right now that are experts on the TGO challenge and are cringing at how I'm messing up the details, but that's what I got from it.
I didn't try to put you off as such. I just said, I think you're going to be challenged enough just by the AT hike itself. And that's just perspective of someone who's done it now again and knowing how difficult it was for me just to do that. But you actually not only wanted to break up your through hike by another through hike, you were going to do something else, weren't you, as well?
Yeah. So I, once again, in way over my head, but I also was really curious and perplexed by the idea of being a ridge runner. I've always really admired what they do. And I've had some experience in the past with I got my wilderness first responder training about a year ago, really enjoyed wilderness medicine, emergency response and things like that. And so I looked into applying to be a ridge runner in Georgia from like February to May timeline, which then I would start the Scotland hike if that worked out, and then potentially do a flip-flop hike of the Appalachian Trail. It just got way too complicated. They ultimately went with someone more qualified for that position, rightfully so.
And somewhat less crazy, yeah.
Yeah, rightfully so. So I think I had maybe too lofty of aspirations for this upcoming year. So I'm not upset the way that it has played out. It seems like it was for the better and for the right way. But I wanted to try at least just to see how I could make the hike a little more unique. But I think just because it is me in my first through hike, that is unique and challenging enough. So
you think? Yeah, it certainly is. But, I love the ambition. I would never have put you off. And the reason you may be wondering why Ryan and I are talking now on the show, and it's really because I want to tell you, we are going to announce that Ryan is a subject of another new show. And what name did we set on this show then, Ryan?
So we're going with JR Hikes, the Appalachian Trail.
Right. And why are you JR?
That's a great question. So we talked about this not long ago, but it's funny. I didn't have a trail name for a while, and was thinking a lot about it. And then after brainstorming, I was trying to come up with these clever ideas to like work in a Star Wars reference or something like that. And
we're going to be R2D2 or something.
Something like that. I don't know. But I started realizing, I was like, hang on a second, I already have a trail name. Like, I don't know why I was trying to make it up. And when I was at grad school at Florida State, I worked kind of part-time in their outdoor education kind of department within student affairs, and worked with the high ropes course, and they have a waterfront property and kayaking and all that stuff. And so the crew that I worked with there was really awesome. And a lot of them were really, really solid, just like folks that had hiked and had been in the outdoors community for a while. And they all used to call me JR, just because whenever I would come in or be over there, I'd be like, it's just Ryan. It's just me. Like, no one fancy, no one important. I've never been like a real flashy guy, just me. And they always called me JR. And I was like, wow, like I've already been given a name by hikers, so I kind of have to stick with that. Right. So,
right.
And I didn't, it feels right.
And it's not insulting either, so which is even
better. Exactly. And I have been very fearful of that. So I didn't want to fight it and go against the name I've already been given by some hikers that I really respect and people that I really admire. So JR it is. And I think it lines up with a lot of who I am and what this hike is meaning to me, of just being Ryan, just being simpler, living simpler, worrying about less material things, and just focusing on what's inside and my own self,
Well, you're going to be perfect for this, and I knew the moment we met that you're very articulate about things, and I think and you're willing to try anything out, which is terrific as well. And one thing I want to tell the audience, which I'm going to play at the end of this, the show's going to be introduced by some music by a group called Ty Goes to the Runner. I met Scooch and Paris, who are from the band, and they've agreed to let us use the music from Through, which is obviously written about a through hike, and so perfect. I'm so appreciative of the guys for doing this. And Ryan likes the music as well, which of course was a critical thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really excellent, and I like everything about this group. I think they're really awesome. So I'm glad that they're letting us use their music. So
that's super. So this is going to be a complete role reversal. With Bruce, I interviewed him twice a week and so on. Ryan's happy to do it the way in which I did it. He's going to record himself and just dump those recordings on Google Drive. I'm going to pick them up and I'm going to put the show out edited. So he's going to try to get some of the atmosphere of the trail, and just be sitting on a rock somewhere sometimes and just talking into his microphone about what it feels like to be out there. And I think it's going to make for another really interesting show. Are you geared up for this? What gear have you got for this?
So pretty much exactly what you used on your hike, just an iPhone and a lapel mic. It seems to do pretty well. It's lightweight and it makes for the best audio recording for when you're doing a through hike.
It really does, and you'll enjoy that. You're gonna also interview other people on the show. I think that might be quite nice if you want to. If you don't, that's also fine. We haven't actually discussed this, so let's see what you think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what makes these shows and really the whole trail so special is the stories and the people that make up the community. So I'm really eager to hear some of those stories and record some of them. And like you said before, always open to trying new things, whether it's recording live like you did going up Katahdin, or recording music or other things. And they may not be successful sometimes. So we're always welcome to feedback if you don't like it. But hearing from other people and hearing from maybe hostel owners like you've been doing, or really anyone's story on the trail is important to me. So
that's awesome. I think you're a very special young man. You know, when you interviewed me, a lot of people said how composed you were. I wasn't sure how prepared you were to interview me, but I was blown away by the quality of the questions you asked. So you really think about this stuff. So I think your perspective as a younger guy hiking the AT is going to be very valuable for people who want to go out there. And I love the fact that you've realised that this is for everybody, this trail, isn't it?
It really is. And I can't say it enough. I mean, that's what has really made me stick with this over the last couple of years is just the stories in the community. I mean, obviously, we all like talking about gear. We all like the outdoors, but it is the people that make it the most exciting and the most meaningful. So
you're going to be back February, so you're going to have about a month's preparation. During that time, we're probably going to lay down some shows about your preparation as well. I think that'd be quite nice maybe you and I will talk about it, and I'll interview you about those episodes. But once you get out there, you'll be on your own doing your thing and recording.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I get back around February 20th, so I only have about 10 days.
Oh my gosh.
To hit the trail. But, it kind of makes sense and it kind of fits me and my style. But all my gear is packed up, sitting at home, ready to go. Okay. And I feel good about the timing. So.
And I know that you in your future, you've already got the walk across Scotland, but you're thinking of other things as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, my heart is always really going to be close to Appalachia, and that's where I'm from and where I grew up. But I've also been so just completely enthralled in the whole business of long distance hiking, whether it be for a week or half a year. So yeah, hopefully Scotland, hopefully the Camino. Big dream in life is a Triple Crown, but looking for ways to just be outdoors and be on trails is going to be something that's just with me for a while.
So you decided to delay growing up and getting a job and being boring. Quite right too.
Yeah.
Okay, mate. Well, look, I am so looking forward to this show. Like I'm looking forward to our other new shows as well. So this is exciting for the Hiking Radio Network, and I'm so excited for you because I know what you've got coming up, and we're going to stay in touch, and we're going to put this show out. Probably won't start till the first week, sometime around the first week of February, but we'll just have to work on that. But thanks for agreeing to do this, Ryan. It's going to be epic, I tell you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Steve, for all the work that you put into this. It means a lot.
No worries. Take it easy, mate.
Bye. Bye.
So there you are, the other show to complete the Hiking Radio Network lineup for 2020. I think Ryan's going to be a great subject for the show with his insights into many things on the trail itself and the internal struggles that always hit us as we make our way up the pathway to Maine. While I remember, listen to the end of the show today because instead of playing out with the Mighty Blue theme, I'll be playing out with the complete version of Ryan's new theme song, Through, by Ty Goes to the Runner. Thanks so much for sharing it, guys. I really appreciate that. And I really can't wait for you all to hear that. I'll also be adding a link to the official Through video in the show notes. Going forward then, we're going to be having this show, The Mighty Blue Show, the Trail Danes podcast where Anna interviews women hikers, Jester Section Hiker with Julie or Jester shining a light on section hikers. And by the way, thanks for supporting that so well. And then these two new shows, A Woman of a Certain Age with Kate Stillwell and JR Hikes the Appalachian Trail. It's ambitious, but I think I can handle it. However, it takes a lot of time, so I'm still looking for sponsorship. Remember, you can always support the show on the podcast page of mightyblueontheat.com. But probably even more important, you can point me in the direction of any company or individual you may know who may want to advertise on any of our 5 shows. Believe me, every little bit helps as this is starting to become an expensive hobby on my part. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Stutzman from his book Hiking Through has reached Midsummer's Day, otherwise known as Naked Hiking Day. I've read this book previously when I was first discovering the Appalachian Trail some years ago. I remember reaching this part of the book and didn't think for a moment that Paul would participate. But man, I was wrong. For the record, by the way, neither Trigger nor I participated this year. Just in case you were wondering, would not have been pretty. I also need to apologise this week to both Paul and Fargo, his friend from Wisconsin in the book, whose accent I mangled incredibly badly. Sorry, guys. I'll see you next week. Chapter 17. Summer Solstice. Franklin and I followed the Schuylkill River for a short distance, then headed into the woods and started climbing. 8 miles later and 1,000 feet higher, we stood on Pulpit Rock and looked over the farms and villages of Berks County. The perimeter of our cathedral that Sunday morning was the distant horizon, and the ceiling reached to the sky where scattered puffs of white drifted against a blue background. An artist greater than Michelangelo had painted the ceiling of this chapel. The birds chorused in worship, and I stood amazed at the scene before me. The homily that morning was brief and heartfelt. O great God, how marvellous is your creation. Amen. The trail was littered with rocks of all sizes, and we picked our way carefully over them, always watching for the white blazes. Wildflowers found little space to grow here, but we discovered an even more edible plant. Wild blueberries were just starting to ripen, and they were much sweeter than the blossoms I had sampled. Conventional hiker wisdom predicts that hikers make fewer miles in this rocky stretch of Pennsylvania, but Franklin and I developed the agility of mountain goats as we bounded from rock to rock and clambered over 22 stony miles that day. We stopped for the night at the Allentown Hiking Club shelter, arriving in time to see Rhino coming out of the woods carrying a dead tree. Not just a portion of the tree, but the entire trunk and branches. Rhino loved fires, and he wasn't satisfied with a small campfire. He wanted an inferno. This was Rhino's second through hike. A German television crew was documenting his journey and met him at designated points along the trail to do updates for the program. We had all assumed he took the name of Rhino because of his size and strength, but his trail name was simply a shortened version of his last name, Reinhold. Rhino built a huge pile of dead trees and lit his bonfire. The colossal blaze kept every mosquito at bay that night. Franklin and I set up camp several hundred feet from the heat and smoke of the conflagration. Even so, the glow lit our tents all night. When we left at 5 the next morning, a huge pile of embers still burned brightly. For the next few nights, hikers would have fire waiting for them when they arrived. 6 miles into another rock-strewn day, I lamented that I needed a coffee break. Franklin surprised me with an offer. He had little bags of coffee, but no stove. He'd sent his stove home to save weight. For the only time on my entire trek, I stopped and brewed coffee. We were high on Blue Mountain, on a ridge trail called The Cliffs, and we sipped our coffee as we sat on an outcropping of rocks overlooking fantastic views. I've had better coffee, but the blend of nature and good conversation made this a special brew. Franklin and I both enjoyed bicycling, and we reminisced about our favourite rides. He recalled a bike ride originating in Asheville, North Carolina, near his hometown. It was a naked bike ride protesting energy consumption and all other kinds of overconsumption. In my mind, folks wanting to bicycle naked had issues far greater than anything they might be protesting. The local law officials' only participation in the ride was to arrest those who were actually overexposed to the sun. The story of the naked bike ride reminded me that the first day of summer was 5 days away. On the trail, that day is traditionally Naked Hiker Day. Hikers do actually hike without clothes. I assume, though, that they surely must wear shoes. Franklin, what are your plans for Naked Hiker Day? If I rode a bike naked, and I certainly did, then I'll have no problem hiking naked. What about you, Apostle? You going to hike naked? No, probably not. Every admonition about modesty and decency taught by my parents and preached from the pulpit was shouting reminders of sin and evil. There's no way I could ever hike naked, even in the woods. But what about tradition? That first night, back in my tent in Horse Gap, I promised myself that I'd live the life of the Appalachian Trail, and that I'd meet new ideas openly. Oh well, I still have 5 days to consider the possibilities, I told myself. We finished our coffee and continued across Blue Mountain, while 800 feet below us, traffic burrowed through the mountain in a tunnel on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. At Lehigh Gap, we crossed the Lehigh River, and the white blazes went up over the face of rocky cliffs. This was not a stroll down a pleasant woodland path, but a precarious climb that required careful placement of feet and hands as we pulled ourselves upwards slowly and cautiously. At the top, we walked through the landscape of another world. All vegetation had died. Dead trees lay everywhere. A zinc plant had mined the area for over 80 years, and sulfur dioxide emissions resulted in the deforestation of the mountain. We found tiny bits of life. Blueberries were making a comeback among the rubble. Franklin and I assumed they were toxic. but we hit them anyway. The absence of trees gave us a great view, but a large black cloud hung ominously over that view. The wind picked up and Franklin suggested setting up our tents and taking refuge from the storm. During all those weeks of walking in the rain, why had I never thought of that simple plan? We pitched our tents beside the trail in record time and waited inside while the storm raged several miles away, but it never arrived, missing us completely. Water was limited in this area, but our guidebooks showed a spring called Metallica. We were unable to locate it, but we did find a sign posted by a trail angel telling us that he had stashed water bottles for hikers at the Little Gap road crossing. We were too late. By the time we arrived at the crossing, all the water was gone. Our only choice seemed to be a quick dash into town. Danielsville, Pennsylvania was down the road 1.5 miles, but hitchhiking failed us again and we started walking. Thunder rumbled in the distance. We'd gone 1/2 mile when I stopped. I thought I heard running water. Franklin was ahead of me and I called him back. Searching the roadside weeds, we found a strong spring. Feeling like explorers making an important discovery, we promptly dubbed it the Franklin Apostle Spring. We filtered a supply of water and hustled back to Little Gap as the storm moved closer. Our tents went up on stealth campsites and we finished just as the rain hit. In a few days, Franklin would meet his wife at Delaware Water Gap and would take 2 days off the trail. I would again lose a hiking partner. But less than a day ahead of me was Fargo, and I was hoping to meet him. He was a cheesehead from Green Bay, Wisconsin, with a Norwegian dialect that sounded as if he had just walked off the Fargo movie set. I'd seen Fargo's journal entries for several months, and I knew I was slowly gaining on him. My register entries were usually brief, but Fargo's were the shortest I've ever seen. He entered only his name. Franklin had hiked with Fargo previously and thought I would enjoy his character. He asked me to give his regards to Fargo if I did catch up with him. Shortly after crossing Fox Gap, we arrived at Kirkridge Shelter. Franklin and I had the shelter to ourselves, so I set up my tent inside, hoping to isolate myself from all bugs. A large yellow moon rose and lit up the shelter. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, watching the moon's soft glow illuminate the entire mountainside. We were no longer alone. A couple had walked up the trail earlier. She was limping painfully, and he tried to encourage her onward. The limp was undoubtedly caused by the high heels she wore. Those heels and a clean dress overnight bag told us that she was not a serious hiker. We watched them in amusement. The male had some hiking skills and apparently wanted his girlfriend to share the experience of the trail. From the snippets of conversation that drifted into my tent that night, I didn't think this hiking togetherness would last much longer. "I told you not to wear heels," said he. "But you didn't tell me about the rocks and roots," said she. "Just go to sleep." "I can't. The floor's too hard." I slept soundly, assured we were well protected from any marauding bears as her high heels lay within easy reach at the foot of her sleeping bag. We walked the 6 miles to Delaware Water Gap before breakfast. As usual, the first order of business was food, so we crossed town to the Water Gap Diner, one of those small-town eateries where the food is excellent and the atmosphere friendly. While Franklin and I ate breakfast in a booth by the window, a familiar figure strode by. The homemade flute sticking out from the backpack and the floppy straw hat told us Padre the priest was in town. I rapped on the window and motioned for him to join us. Our conversation that morning confirmed to me that God answers prayers in his own way and his own time. I spoke about what had brought me to the trail, the heartache of losing my wife and the grief of my children. I'd found healing on this trail and God was revealing much to me. What mountaintop experiences I've had out there. "This hike reminds me of the Paschal Mystery," Padre replied. "What's the Paschal Mystery?" both Franklin and I wanted to know. Padre explained, "It refers to the suffering, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the promise of life that gives us. I walk through the low valleys on this trail and see dead trees and decaying matter, and I'm reminded of the death of Jesus. But I continue onto higher elevations and see new growth and new life that reminds me of his resurrection. That's the rhythm of our spiritual lives too. We walk through valleys, we lose loved ones, we suffer, we struggle, we experience many kinds of death. We travel on and we reach a higher plane where we pause to enjoy the views, look back to remember where we came from, and look forward to mysteries still ahead of us. But we do not stay on the exhilarating mountaintop. If we sat there and never moved on, the views would no longer be enjoyable. And so we go on, just as we do on the trail. After valleys and struggles and even deaths, we always have the hope of new life. Someday we'll pass through the last valley and finally reach the last mountaintop, and we'll never be bored by the glorious view that waits us there. Padre was putting words to what I had been discovering as I walked this path. This trail mirrored my spiritual journey. I was finding that gift of hope and new life. I knew I was on a mountaintop at that table in the Watergap Diner. Even Franklin, who had admittedly soured on Christianity, felt the sacredness of the moment. We spoke of salvation, the blood of Christ, and the cross. I was both amazed and delighted. Padre and I agreed on fundamental issues of salvation, a Mennonite and a Catholic priest. Perhaps I wouldn't have to get Padre saved after all. Heaven had expanded its borders, and I wouldn't be spending eternity talking only with other Mennonites. But what about all those rituals you have? I asked Padre. In the Mennonite church, we don't have or believe in rituals. When Padre finished laughing, he reminded me that he had just been in a Mennonite service the previous Sunday, and yes, the service was filled with ritual. I wonder if God had a reason for putting me on the trail with a Catholic priest. The Presbyterian Church of the Mountains faces Main Street, not far from the Appalachian Trail. A hostel located in the basement is available only to long-distance hikers. Franklin and I stayed there along with Padre and Rhino's dog, Ronya. Dogs sometimes become nuisances on the trail, but this dog was the smartest and best-behaved dog I've ever met. I picked out a bunk next to Rhino and Ronya, hoping Ronya would protect me from any church mice that might attack during the night. Rhino and I both stopped at the post office to pick up scheduled mail drops, but neither of our packages were there. Rhino decided to stay in town another day, waiting for his mail, but I didn't want to waste time, so I asked the post office to return mine to sender once it arrived. Missing that food box wasn't a crucial issue, since I was moving into New Jersey and New York, where delis and roadside groceries are plentiful. Leaving town, I walked along I-80 and crossed the bridge over the Delaware River as cars and trucks whizzed by at dizzying speeds. Crossing the river meant I was entering New Jersey, my 8th state. I happily left the busy interstate and climbed. 5 miles later, I had my first surprising views out over this new state. I'd expected towns and industrial sites and congested highways, but all I saw now were trees, hills, and a few houses dotting the countryside. I might have moved to a new state, but I had not left the rocks behind. It would be several days until the rocks finally became fewer and I could concentrate on anything other than where to place my next step. When most of the rocks disappeared from the path, New Jersey became a delight. I could hear and almost feel a mysterious sound throbbing through the forest, starting staccato and building into a loud vibration, like a chest of drawers being pushed across the floor. I'd heard about the territorial drumming of a ruffed grouse, but as I walked through the woods of New Jersey and listened to the amazing sound, it was hard to imagine it was only a bird beating his wings. Once the rocks had almost disappeared, the trail improved and my hiking became more aggressive. 2 days and 50 miles later, I found a secret shelter. Jim Murray had thru-hiked himself, and he then built a shelter on his private property available only to fellow thru-hikers. Earlier that afternoon, I'd sought shelter from a rainstorm by squeezing under a low rock overhang. I shared the tight space with 100 gypsy moth caterpillars also attempted to stay dry. Jim Murray's small and rustic cabin was a welcome refuge for the night. The cabin sat under scattered trees at the edge of a mowed green field. It was late when I walked up to the door. The cabin could sleep 4 people, and 2 had already settled in. One of the hikers lay in the loft above. On the main floor, another hiker stood in the small cooking area, brewing a pot of tea. "You look like you could use some hot tea," he offered, as I took in the long brown beard and hair that reached halfway down his back. I gladly accepted his offer and inquired if they had room for one more. "Yes, we do, and there's a solar shower outside if you want to use it." It sounded good to me, since some of those caterpillars had crawled on me while I was counting them, and I wished to wash away that memory. I started the introductions. "Where are you from?" "We just met here tonight. I'm Dave. I suppose you might say I'm from Colorado." I suspected there must be a story, since he wasn't sure exactly where home was, but I didn't question further. A large hand extended down from the loft, and a man's voice welcomed me. I couldn't understand his name, but he said he was from Skansen. "Where?" I asked. I got the same reply. "Skansen. Never heard of it." "Oh, it's up north there, where the Packers play in Green Bay. Skansen." Dave, from possibly Colorado, interrupted to translate for me. Skansen was actually Wisconsin. "Let me guess. You're Fargo, aren't you?" I directed to the loft. "You sure, you betcha," came back down. "Franklin sends his regards." "That's my buddy. You've been hiking with him too?" Dave had gone outside, and while I sipped my tea, Fargo informed me that Dave was known on the trail as Drifter Dave, and his home was actually the trail itself. He had no money and lived from hiker box to hiker box. The tea I was drinking had come from the last box he had raided. He ate what he could yogi or find in nature, and he was just recovering from being violently sick from poisonous mushrooms he had eaten. While we talked, several mice ran through the room. The door to the cabin stood open, and, watching the mice, I strategically placed a hiking pole over the threshold of the door. In one moment of perfect timing and sheer good luck, I flipped the pole just as one mouse ran over it. The little fellow made a high, arcing flight through the open door and landed right at Dave's feet. I cringed inwardly as I waited for Dave to put his literal stamp of approval on my work with his boot. Instead, he reached down and picked up the mouse, cupping it in his hands. "What should I do with it?" "It'll die if I leave it out here," he said. He walked round the back of the cabin to find sanctuary for his new friend. I suspect he may even have brought it back into the cabin later. Fargo told me there were hikers who were uncomfortable with Drifter Dave, but watching his gentleness with the mouse and thinking of his sharing the little tea he had, I was convinced I had nothing to fear from the man. The next day, Dave planned to go into Unionville, New York, to visit the mayor and see if he could score some tobacco. We were in New Jersey, but the trail followed the state line, so the New York town of Unionville was just half a mile off the New Jersey AT. The mayor welcomed hikers to his home, inviting them to stay, feeding them and providing transportation around town. Fargo and I went to Unionville for breakfast, but it was far too early to stop and see the mayor. Dave stayed behind at the shelter that morning. The hiker box was locked in another small building, and he intended to wait in hopes that someone would show up and give him access to the box. He would visit the mayor later. Weeks later, I had a conversation with a hiker who had been at the mayor's house when Dave arrived. "Did he score any tobacco?" I asked. Turns out Dave got his tobacco and several good meals and was being driven around town in the mayor's Cadillac. Fargo was a retired pharmacist and had come to the trail several weeks before I did. While I knew a little about a lot, Fargo knew a lot about a lot and was always willing to share his knowledge. He loved hunting, fishing and the Green Bay Packers. He was a good family man and his wife missed him. Well, I'm not sure if she missed him or just wanted him to come home. Their house in Green Bay was for sale, and if it sold, Fargo would leave the trail and go home and move. The real estate agent had things under control, but Fargo's wife still wanted him to come home, just in case they found a buyer. "Why are you out here then?" I wondered. He had retired at 56, and he had dreamed of the trail for a long time. "The missus dropped me off down south, never figuring I'd last. I love it out here, but every time I call the house, she wonders when I'm coming home." "Have you thought about not calling home?" I offered. "The missus would skin me alive, you betcha." As we hiked along after breakfast, I realised it was the first day of summer. That meant it was also Naked Hiker Day. So what was I going to do? "It's a tradition." No, I couldn't. A Christian could never do anything like that. Why can't a Christian do that? Isn't immodesty a sin? Back home I would be embarrassed to be seen without a shirt, and now I was considering hiking without any clothes at all. But I wanted the satisfaction of knowing I had done something that scared me. It would certainly be a foolish thing, but would it be a sin? I believe that thoughts can be just as sinful as actions, so if anyone caught sight of me and went down wicked thought paths, that would be sin, and I'd be guilty of causing sin. Okay, be realistic if possible. The only reaction there's going to be is laughter. Furthermore, aren't Christians free from legalistic do's and don'ts? There was the dilemma I'd faced all my life. I can't do it because I'm a Christian. Or, because I'm a Christian, I have the freedom to do this. Which one applied? Which one was the truth? I heard myself say, "Hey Fargo, how about some naked hiking today?" "I'd forgotten about that. Believe you me, no one wants to see this here figure. I'll be in deep doggy-doo if the missus finds out." Fargo didn't debate as long as I had, though. "But hey then, let's do it anyway. You go down the trail there, 300 or 400 feet, and I'll stay back here. Then I'll catch up with you later." Sounded like a good plan to me. With my heart threatening to pound its way out of my chest, I rounded the next bend and cautiously surveyed the area for any other human presence. I wanted to do this, but desperately did not want to get caught. Many hikers will say that if no one sees you hiking in the bare essentials, it doesn't count. But in my case, I would be the only one who knew, and I was the only one who mattered. I remembered Franklin's naked bike ride protest. I needed a protest. I know. I'll protest sin. That's what forced us into wearing clothes in the first place. "Sin, I doth protest thee," I mumbled, while slipping out of my hiking gear. I'd lost so much weight that my birthday suit hung from my ribs in waves of wrinkles. I left my backpack unbuckled and slung my clothes over the top. Feeling like a naughty boy, I cautiously moved out. Two senses were on high alert. My ears strained to hear any sound of humans, and my eyes darted everywhere to watch for poison ivy. My Naked Hiker Day was only Naked Hiker minutes. It was over in several hundred feet. It was exciting and exhilarating. It was foolish, and I was relieved when it was finished. I dressed quickly and waited for Fargo. He was grinning. That felt great. I went at least 500 feet, don't you know? As we exited the Garden of Eden and walked down Oil City Road toward the Wallkill River, we laughed and giggled like little kids. We had only known each other a few hours and had already hiked naked. Go figure. We were nearing Vernon, New Jersey when the trail cut through a swampy area. A raised wooden walk wove through the cattails and swamp grasses. I met a young lady on the walkway who was snapping photographs. Something stopped me, and instead of just saying hello, I took time to chat with her. During our conversation, I sensed that God wanted me to tell her about my journey. As I told her about losing my wife, she started to cry. She'd lost her best friend to a drunk driver, and as she struggled with her loss and grief, something had drawn her to this spot. God had placed her in my path that day, and I shared with her the only thing I knew that could match the pain of such a loss. God knew how she felt, and even though it might be hard to believe, God loved her and would comfort her. I wondered how often God had placed people in my daily path with needs that I never sensed, because I was always too busy.
Dogs to eat. I think I'll make like a leaf and go live in the trees at walking speeds. I'll be running from society. Look at me now. I don't love all that I eat. Swallow pills for dinner again, cause some man said supposedly they're good for me. Well, you're metaphorical medicine, synonymous with brainwashing my head. You make claims are crazy, pointed at me, but I'm not the one who made you unhappy. Look at you now. Packing all my things, I won't look back. Everything I need fits in this backpack. Well, I guess when push comes to shove, there's only one thing I am afraid of. I'm not scared to die, only afraid that I will never make it through my whole life alive. So you tell me that I just need to learn to see it's better not to take chances. I'll show you a man who'd never listen to anything you'd ever have to say at all. Packing all my things, I won't look back. Everything I need fits in this backpack. Just find out the hard way. For when it comes to what I'm capable of, the mountains are calling me and I must go.